So the scene in House of the Dragon with Viserys makes his way to the throne room one last time. He's on a cane. He refuses to let anybody help him except for his brother Daemon. I believe this is probably the best scene in House of the Dragon throughout the entire season, and I think a lot of people think so as well. So why is this the best scene in House of the Dragon? Well, in short, good writing. This moment is essentially the payoff that shows the complete character arc of Viserys. This is the culmination of many well-written scenes between him and various family members, specifically Daemon and his daughter Rhaenyra, and this scene essentially is the ending of his story within the bigger story. This scene needs little to no dialogue, and it has none because of all the prior scenes that come before it. This scene really tugs on your heartstrings because through his actions and dialogue, we've really learned who Viserys is, and even in the face of death, he's trying to save his family and the realm for that matter if you consider the prophecy of ice and fire. This scene was essentially again the ending to a subplot or a story within the bigger story, and it was well paid off to good use of writing tools such as foreshadowing, character arcs and development, actions and dialogue, as opposed to just being told who he was. Good writing actually shows it. And you've probably heard that before as far as writing goes, show us, don't tell us. For example, in my book, The Crimson Gods, I wanted my main character Ashea to be a bit rebellious and adventurous as well. So through her actions and dialogue, I show that instead of just writing, she's somewhat adventurous and rebellious. So instead of just telling you that, I have her leave her home of Wolfpine in defiance of her father to look for her missing brother. Her actions let the reader draw that conclusion. So let's take a look at a few of these scenes prior to this scene in House of the Dragon, a few of these other scenes that kind of get us to this point and why it pays off so well. Number 1, the scab scene. Very early on in the season, I believe episode 1, we see Viserys with a little scab on his back that won't really heal, and so of course we're left wondering what the hell that is. Now, of course, we know they're not going to show that scene if it didn't have some importance, otherwise they would just kind of mention it in passing. So this establishes early on that we have a limited time with Viserys, and this is a great writing tool that when used well, establishes a sense of urgency to the audience, even if the character doesn't know it. This was early foreshadowing of him knocking on heaven's door, and although he would die soon after the scene we're referencing, this was an emotional payoff knowing it was his last act as king, specifically defending his daughter and his promise to her. And speaking of his daughter, number 2, the Rhaenyra scene with him and Rhaenyra talking about the death of her mother, Aemma Arryn. Now, there were several great scenes between him and Rhaenyra throughout the season that kind of led to this, but I think this was one of the best ones to kind of explain what's going on here as far as the good writing involved. These scenes, and this one in particular, really establishes their relationship, and although complicated, ultimately his love for her overrode the political aspect of her being his heir. In this scene, Rhaenyra learns how much he loved her mother, Aemma Arryn, and admits he missed out a lot on her growing up and being so much like her mother. And of course, this was the scene where he was upset that she flew off to Dragonstone alone to retrieve the dragon egg from Daemon. So he is trying to protect her, but he realizes she's a lot like Aemma and she wants to get shit done. So he does express to her in this scene how important it is to take another wife, and she actually understands all this because it is his duty to the realm, and that drives most of his decisions. All this great dialogue shows their bond growing after her mother's death, and that's why it hits harder when this last act is actually to defend his daughter Rhaenyra in the throne room in front of the whole entire realm, specifically the High Towers. And for a third scene, another great scene here is the one where Viserys actually confronts his brother, Daemon. This was the other main character that Viserys interacted with. This was essentially the triarchy here was Viserys, Daemon, and Rhaenyra and their relationships, and that's what made this last scene pay off so well. But specifically the one in the throne room where Viserys calls in Daemon and tells him he decided to name a new heir, and it's not Daemon. So this scene is outstanding as well because it actually shows the core discord between the two brothers, and this introduces one of the most important storytelling tools, and that is conflict. And without conflict, the scene in question would not have paid off as well when Daemon helped Viserys up those stairs. And Daemon assumed he was his heir, but he learned he wasn't. But he also gets a chance to open up to Viserys, and although his behavior at times is, well, let's say deplorable, he ultimately wants to protect him. He's one of the only ones that care enough to be open with him and tell him he's trying to protect him and he thinks he's weak. So although they're often estranged and Daemon is an outcast, ultimately to them, blood is thicker than water. They are brothers, and they see the good in each other despite their differences. Daemon is loyal to his brother despite wanting power for himself. And of course, that's the main thing we learn about Daemon here as well, is although he does want power, his will to please Viserys and earn his respect overrides all other motivations. There's also the foreshadowing written in the scene as well where he cuts his hand on the throne. And that leaves us asking, what does that mean? Is he in trouble? Is he worthy of the throne? Is he going to die? And again, this adds more tension because we know he is doomed, so we as an audience want to see them make those amends, and that makes the release of that tension that much more powerful and emotional in general when we get to that final scene in the throne room. So the throne room scene in question works so well, with the added touch of Daemon helping him up the stairs and putting on his crown, and he only allows Daemon to help him because if you remember correctly, the King's Guard tried to help him, but he said no. And this was a good touch that didn't have to be in there, but because of all these other scenes we talked about and many, many others, no dialogue was needed for the audience to understand their bond was deeper than the drama, and that Daemon in his heart likely knew this was his last act as king, protecting his family. Now, of course, all this works so well because of the writing of George R.R. Martin and his idea of gray characters that were all capable of good and evil. Now, of course, for House of the Dragon, all the credit goes to the writers of the show and the showrunners because George R. R. Martin didn't write a lot about Viserys himself in Fire and Blood. But of course, they built off this idea of these gray characters, where Viserys was a weak king but a good man. He loved his wife as opposed to just a political marriage. He put the good of the realm and his family over his own ambitions. He's soft and caring, but he's capable of becoming that dragon we all hear about all the time as far as people like Daemon and Rhaenyra herself. And in this sense, in this scene, he does become that dragon we want him to be, or I would argue from a writing perspective, although he was physically weak from disease, Viserys here was at his strongest. So ultimately in writing, whether you're writing a book, a screenplay, a TV show, a comic book, whatever it may be, characters must come first. We must see a backstory for being the way they are, and the audience must see that change, otherwise known as a character arc. Characters need depth for the audience to identify with, and all those details matter. The details all add up to create a deeply flawed person, as we all are, and that's why we all relate, and it moves us emotionally because we are all Viserys, Daemon, or Rhaenyra in some way. And if you like this video, please hit that subscribe button and let me know in the comments below, as we take probably a shift here on this channel towards more of the writing perspective behind these great TV shows, movies, etc., so we can continue to analyze our favorite stories as opposed to just recaps and reviews, but go into the writing aspect of things, why it makes things so good or bad for that matter. And if you're a writer, a potential writer, or just want a better understanding of storytelling itself as far as why these shows work or why they don't, go ahead and check out this writing advice playlist that should be on the screen now. And as usual, a huge shout out to my supporters on Patreon. I really appreciate your continued support. And to everyone, thanks for watching, and we'll see you next time.